Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic hypersonic.
Positronic hypersonic.
Positronic hypersonic.
I'm Barry Peacock, and I'm here to talk to you about Tron Ares, which doesn't officially release in the US until tomorrow, but I have seen it as of yesterday. As I'm always saying, it's good to be a pop culture journalist with a growing YouTube channel. So, the film stars Greta Lee as Eve Kim, and of course, Jared Leto as the titular character, Ares. Also in the cast are Evan Peters from the MCU, among other things. He plays Quicksilver. He's in this as Julian Dillinger. Gillian Anderson has a tiny role as his mom. She's in it as well. And it once again puts us in the world of Tron, of course, which of course encompasses the legacy entities of the franchise. Encon, the Kevin Flynn company, Kevin Flynn being the Jeff Bridges character, and the Dillinger company, in this film represented by Julian Dillinger. In this go-around, the two companies are dealing with the fact that things that their sophisticated lasers can basically 3D print, which in the case of Encon would be things like orange groves and other things that would benefit humanity. And in the case of the Dillinger company, military applications, soldiers that are 100% expendable, military equipment, and so forth, is able to sustain cohesiveness or physicality in the real world beyond 29 very short minutes. So they're looking for something called the permanence code. Very early on in the film, the Eve Kim character, who is the CEO of Encon, discovers the permanence code in Kevin Flynn's old programs, in his old computer. And Julian Dillinger figures out that she's figured it out because he hacked into the Encon systems and learned that she had figured it out, although the code itself is not in the system because it's on a hard drive that Eve is carrying on her person to protect it from being hacked. So in order to get his hands on the code, Dillinger sends Ares into the real world for 29 minutes to try to capture her and get her to give up the code, which he doesn't necessarily know she's holding on a hard drive, but he knows that she found it and is assuming she can provide it. What he doesn't count on is the fact that Ares, which is not just a program, but a very sophisticated AI, achieves sentience very quickly. They don't call it that in the movie. They don't reference that, but that's what happens. He achieves sentience through, his observations of the outside world from things that Julian Dillinger has hacked into and, stored the information of. He reads Frankenstein, for example. He reads Eve Kim's texts. When he's in the real world briefly, he observes rain and finds himself wondering what it would feel like to be in the rain, which of course is not the kind of thing that a program, a non-sentient entity would normally experience. So this complicates things for Dillinger because having achieved sentience, he decides that he wants the permanence code for himself so that he can exist in the real world without a 20-minute time limit. Of course, this puts him at odds with Julian Dillinger because he wants the code so that he can make money building all kinds of machines and vehicles and weapons and soldiers that can be sold to the highest bidder. So when Eve is confronted by Ares, she ends up destroying the hard drive with the code on it so that Dillinger can't get it. But Dillinger digitizes her with one of his lasers and ports her into his company's mainframe, where Ares is ordered to extract the code from her memory. But when he finds out that that would kill her and delete her not only in the mainframe but in the real world, because she's not in the real world while she's in the mainframe, he decides he's not going to do that. He doesn't want to erase her from existence. And so he makes a deal with her that if he helps her get the code, which is in her mind, to safety, in other words, back into the real world where it can't be taken from her from inside the mainframe, she has to help him take advantage of the code so that he can exist permanently in the real world. And so the rest of the movie revolves around Eve and Ares trying to get away from Dillinger's other very sophisticated AI program, Ares's number two, the AI Athena, who keeps getting sent into the real world in 29-minute increments to try to get, Eve back into the digital realm where he can extract the code from her. Of course, Eve still wants the code so that she can do good things for humanity with it. So she ends up sending Ares into Kevin Flynn's original mainframe in which the film Tron took place. So that one, he doesn't disintegrate when his 29 minutes are up, and two, he can extract the code from the same place she originally found it, which is the mainframe on Flynn's computer. As I'm sure you can imagine, he ends up succeeding in this. He gets out of that mainframe with the code, as well as with an impermanence code, which he can use to construct weapons that will destroy, on contact, Dillinger's machines and soldiers and so forth, that he uses to fight Athena. In the end, Athena is killed permanently. Ares makes himself permanent, although in the process loses immortality. He becomes essentially a one-life being, as opposed to an immortal being, just kind of like a human, who goes off to explore the world. And Eve ends up using the code to create all kinds of great things that help humanity and which don't then disintegrate within 29 minutes. So I've never been the biggest Tron fan. I didn't see the original Tron all the way through until well into my adulthood, even though it came out when I was like 11. I didn't think too much of Tron Legacy that I remember. I saw it. It didn't really speak to me in any way. But despite all of that, I really did like this movie. Now, I have to say, they didn't reinvent the wheel. They didn't cover any new sort of narrative ground in terms of the concepts of the film. You know, basically Ares is like kind of like a Frankenstein character, or maybe more accurately a Pinocchio character that wants to be permanent, not expendable, not something that every time they leave the mainframe, they have a 29-minute, cycle and can otherwise only exist in the mainframe in a place where they have to follow orders. So kind of like Data from Star Trek Next Generation. So it's not anything we haven't seen before in terms of the narrative. It even has the corporate CEO that's just trying to make all kinds of money, ethics be damned, Jurassic Park, just you could name 100 movies where that's the villain's motivation. So they haven't reinvented the wheel. They haven't covered any new narrative ground that makes you go, wow, that was some heavy stuff, some deep stuff. So it's all familiar territory. But I really liked the cast. Greta Lee, who I actually only know from her role on The Morning Show, where her character is kind of not a great person, has a really good turn in this movie. I really like the Eve Kim character. And despite the fact that I don't really like Jared Leto as an actor, I liked his character in this movie quite a bit. They did a good job, writing a sort of Pinocchio-esque character that I found charming and likable and, that had good chemistry with Greta Lee. So I really enjoyed that aspect of the film. Evan Peters does a good job as a mustache-twirling villain. Jeff Bridges is in it very briefly, and his part is good. I think it suited the plot quite well. He's there kind of as the wise old man character who gives the quote unquote hero a bit of a kind of like a pep talk or kind of like some wisdom very briefly, but it works in the movie. Gillian Anderson is in it all too briefly, but she's very good in her part. I love Gillian Anderson. And I thought that the visuals were really well done. The special effects, the digital effects, all of that. It really just looked fantastic. There's a great soundtrack by Nine Inch Nails. And I thought the action sequences were very well done. Very cool action sequences. Chases on the light cycles and, fight scenes with the crazy like Frisbee things, some of which are not quite Frisbee shaped in this movie, that, trail light behind them. It's just very cool, very, Matrixy in a lot of ways. And so I liked that. So it's just a really enjoyable film. Now, if you're a Tron purist, you can probably pick holes in it in terms of how it does or doesn't fit in with the themes of Tron. But none of that occurred to me because I'm not a Tron aficionado. So I just, any of that might have been there or whatever went over my head. So I really enjoyed it, despite, its shortcomings in that department, if there are any. And, there were some little nits you could pick just like you could in any other movie. For example, some of the plot points are a little contrived. Like, like I say in the beginning, Julian Dillinger hacks into the Encon systems, and it's really kind of easy for him to do that. And I don't know how hard or how easy hacking is. I'm not a hacker, but like, it's just something that, oh, and he hacks into the system, like, and Palpatine somehow returned, that kind of a thing where it's just there and you accept it. I also wasn't really clear on why Ares wanted the permanence code. I mean, I guess I kind of said it before, it would allow him to live in the outside world as opposed to just in the mainframe where his whole existence is following orders. So I don't know. I guess that was it. I mean, he also seems to bristle at the idea of being an expendable, reusable weapon when in the outside world. He kind of seems not to like that idea. And I think it's part of what causes him to achieve sentience. He kind of hears that that's what his purpose is, and it doesn't work for him, as it were. So I think maybe that's why he might have wanted it. But like I said, the balance of that is that he just gets one life now. So I don't know. I guess that would be why he wanted the code, but they don't really explore that. And I think they could have explored that, and it might have made the movie better, but it's not a bad movie the way it is if you're looking at it as a piece of entertainment. Something else that I thought, could have been explained but wasn't, that makes you go, huh? When you're watching the movie is, how did they digitize Eve Kim and turn her into a program just with this laser? Like, how did you digitize a person? I mean, it's like the transporter in Star Trek, right? So, okay, so we've seen that before, but they don't give you any it just comes out of nowhere. Oh, just digitize her, like you could just, just turn on the light. Just, fire the gun, just like it's just an everyday thing. Oh, just digitize her. They don't take any time to point out that that's like a weird thing. It's just make it seem like it's commonplace, which that's crazy. And then on the flip side of that, she gets undigitized and put back into the real world, but doesn't for some reason have a 29-minute time limit. She's just put back into the world as human, as opposed to whatever the programs are when they're put in the real world, like whatever they're made out of, she's just human again and can just exist permanently because she did before. They don't really explain that either. So if, that kind of thing hangs you up, you can get hung up right there and be like, oh, this movie is stupid. But if you just let it go, which I'm not the best at doing, but for some reason found myself doing in this movie, it doesn't actually hurt the movie. The movie is still good. At one point, they're flying around in the mainframe on light cycles and various other devices or vehicles, I should say, and there's water in the mainframe. I wasn't sure what that was about. Maybe part of a cooling system. But yeah, there's water, liquid. I didn't understand what that was about. They don't explain in the end how it is that she has the code. Like, we know that Ares gets the code from the mainframe, but he never gives it to her. I'm not sure how she got the code. They don't really explain that, but I don't know. And then there was kind of a weird ending that makes it seem like they cut something out of the middle of the film that they reference at the end, but you have no idea what it is. The Ares character in the real world is chasing down some kind of story related to Encon about a couple of people he's looking at in photographs, but you have no idea who they are and why he's looking at them and what their significance is. So that was kind of a weird thing. And then there's a post-credit scene where Julian Dillinger, who, in order to evade capture at the end of the movie for all the crimes he's committed throughout the movie, he digitizes himself into his own mainframe. And you see him at the end in the mainframe discovering one of those discs that I talked about earlier, but it's the disc with all the circles on it that belonged to the David Warner character Sark in the original Tron. And as he's picking it up, a voice sort of echoes throughout the mainframe and it says Sark. And then when he touches it, his body kind of gets a shock, and you see very briefly that he's wearing the digital outfit that the Sark character wore in the original Tron. So I'm not sure what that's about, probably setting up some kind of sequel. But Sark had originally come from Flynn's computer, if I'm not mistaken. So how that all ties in, I don't know. Maybe because of the hack of Encon. So, you can find things about the movie to talk about in terms of it being imperfect and having kind of either plot holes or kind of loose ends. But the rest of it really is just so enjoyable, from the performances and the visuals and the soundtrack, that even though those sort of plot holes exist, and even though it's not Shakespeare in terms of the plot, they didn't, put forth anything terribly serious that makes you go, wow, that was some thought-provoking stuff. And, while they don't cover any ground that hasn't been covered in other media before, it's still, I think, a very enjoyable film. I really liked it. I would give it 4 out of 5 stars. I think it's a good movie, and you should go see it when it opens tomorrow or at some point thereafter if you're here in the US. But that's really it. So I'm going to get out of here. I'll be back with another video soon. Until I return, I wish you peace and long life.